Rabbi, welcome back to Yerushalmi Maasrot. We're holding at Tesvav Amud Beis. Now, Ramehel, when you bring fruit into your house and you're going to stay there for Shabbos, that comes with a new Maaseh obligation now. You can't eat it arai anymore. Right? You can't eat it temporary eating. Now, Hakam Oidin, Tanakama and Rameh both agree, when you bring your place, just a normal place for the night, right? She'ena Tavelas, well, that doesn't make it Chayav Maaseh. You know, bring it to your house where you're going to stay during the week, your little lodge, your little park bench during the week. That doesn't make a Maaseh obligation. But Ma Ben Lina, Ma Ben Teresa, what's the difference between where you stay during the week and where you stay on Shabbos? He says, Adam Megalga Belina. During the week, you'll get by. When it comes to Shabbos, you're not enough happy to get by. You want a proper place for Shabbos, like the Hereford Suite, which is a beautiful lodge in Prestwich, if someone wants to stay there. During the week, you'll stay where you need to stay. But you're not going to spend Shabbos just anywhere. You'll look for a place fitting for staying. Therefore, Rameh holds, although a house you're going to on your journey, I mean, you might stay there the weekday, that's not your house. That doesn't have a Maaseh obligation. It's not kover for Maasrot. But the place where you stay for Shabbos, that is your home. Tani, we learned in the Brisa. Maaseh b'Bishua. Now, this might have been in the early years. So is this here now in the booklet? Yeah. He was going with his Talmidim to the place of Yechon ben Zakkai. So then the people over there in the villages, where Bishua went past, Mivin and parents were bringing them demai fruit to eat. Rabbi Yeshua said, if you're going to stay here this night in this place, we have to take Maaseh on this fruit. But if not, then we don't have to take Maaseh. In other words, he held the place where you're just going to stay, just the odd night. He held if you're going to stay there that night even, that had a problem. You can't eat demai till you take Maaseh. Even one night is considered your home. So therefore, you want to tell me it's not Tevel? He seems to worry even one night. Rabbi Yeshua dat and Nikia. He was very fussy. He wouldn't stay in any old place. Even in a weekday, he would choose a nice place. Therefore, the place that he chose was like a house, and you can't eat demai there until you take a Maaseh. But wait a minute, everyone else are fools? No one else cares about where they stay the night in a weekday? I mean, there are many people who are very careful where to have a nice place. According to you, the place where you stay must have been a house for them. So why does the Mishnah say you're going on your way, you do not have a Chayav Maasrot until you reach your destination or a place where you stay for Shabbos? And he says, Rabbi Yeshua, he had many people escorting him. He had all his Talmidim with him. And he could carry on even at night until he finds a nice place to stay. Udu Amas, he's the one who said, Lino Teveles, that staying the night creates a Tevel status for his fruit, because that is the din for him. But everyone else don't have a big, is the word retinue? Is that the word? They don't have a whole crowd escorting them. They can't just carry on at night until they find a nice place to stay. So for them, it's not therefore considered a place of a nice place, and therefore the Maaseh obligation has not yet begun. Right? Everyone else has to just stay, whatever for the din is for them. Lino Teveles, the night doesn't create a Tevel status. But we learned in our Mishnah, the peddlers going by Yoros in the villages to sell cosmetics, whatever it is. They can eat until they reach their place where they're going to stay the night. But once they reach their place they're staying, they have a Chayav Maasrot. Now, they don't have a big crowd with them, and yet the Mishnah says where they stay the night is their home. So you see, even if you're going on your own, where you stay your night is your home. So therefore be sure as well, the reason why staying the night is like a home is not because he had people with him. So the answer is, what does it mean, the place where you stay with the peddlers? Basically, it's their own home, We're talking about these peddlers, they go around the villages, and they go home every night. Yeah, they're not going village to village to village all day long, and then night go next village. No, they're going back home. They go work in little circles around their home. So they're allowed to eat the fruit, until they reach their Mokum Lina, which is their own home. But if they're in, alright, if they're going from village to village to village to village non-stop, then sure enough the din will be different. He said, our Mishnah is talking about a case going in and Kfar Hanania, yeah. These ones in the village Hanania, they go for business 4 or 5 villages near their town, and they go back home and they sleep in their own home. So for them, therefore, Maser is Kaveah, therefore the Temel status, you do have to take Maser. Now we brought the view of Rabbi Yehuda, right? When the peddler reaches the town where he wants to stay the night, the first town is considered his home. And bringing fruit into it fixes it, has a chiyuv ma'aser. Now, Tani Rav Chalav ben Shol, the Brisa explains Rabbi Yehuda. You know, a peddler, he takes a lot of merchandise, he reaches the town where he's going to stay the night, he wants to unload everything, but by submission the first house he reaches, and to stay there the night. Right, if the Balabais agrees, he wants to reach his first house and stay there. Therefore, the first house that he goes is considered his home, and when the fruit come in, it's kaveah for chiyuv ma'aser. He says the first house, that's the home that he wants. Okay. Right, let's carry on. They ask over here, and we said the place where you stay the night is not your home. Now that's for people going on the journey or for the peddlers. Here the Brisa seems to say the first house he reaches for his night is considered his home, and it's kaveah fruit for chiyuv ma'aser. Some say, according to Rishlakish, we're talking about the peddlers who are going in the villages near their town. They're going back home, and there's a machlokes Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanakama holds when he goes to his place of sleeping, his home, that's when kaveah for ma'aser. Rabbi Yehuda says the first house is his home. The first house that he goes with his merchandise is considered his home, and has a chiyuv ma'aser. It's not because he wants to sleep in the first night, in the first house, because he's going to go to his home. But since he takes a lot of merchandise to sell, he wants to unload it. You hear that? He wants to unload it in the first house which he reaches. That's considered like his home, and his kaveah, his fruit for chiyuv ma'aser. So it could be he can have a house even though he's not actually staying there the night, because it's his warehouse where he can unload everything. Seems that's what someone said. Alright. Halacha Gimel, yeah? Halacha Gimel, right. Kaveah peres for Maaseh by separating Truma. Let's see. Peres shetzaraman achledim v'melachta. So you separated Truma, but the fruit is not fully developed. You obviously still want to develop it further, but you took Truma. Reb Lezer says you cannot eat mehen ara, you can't even eat for it temporary until you separate all the ma'aseros. The Chachamim allow it because they say you cannot create a tavel status by separating Truma when the fruit is not fully developed. Except for a basket of figs or other fruit. Although it's not complete yet, the Chachamim agree separating Truma is kaveah ma'aser. Now, Mishnah brings another opinion that argues on the main din that fruit is kaveah through separating Truma. You have a basket of figs that you took Truma. Rav Shimon matir. Rav Shimon allows you to eat it temporary because he held separating Truma is not kaveah for Maaseh. The Chachamim forbid it, even Arai, because it was kaveah through Hafrashas Truma, as we said. So let's just summarize. Let's see that again. So you got the fruit which took Truma early. Rav says you can't eat. The Chachamim say you can. And then, right, apart from a basket of figs, that although it's lo nigma, the Chachamim agree there it's kaveah. And then a kalkala where even a basket where you took Truma, Rav Shimon is still leaving. Rav Shimon matir. He says it's not kaveah at all. But the Chachamim say it is. Okay. Right. Now, this is the reference of Maasrot coming about because you're selling Maasrot, and that can also bring about a Maasrot obligation. So a person tells his friend, take this coin, this is a coin, and give me 5 figs that you will cut from your tree. So the purchaser cannot eat the figs until he takes Maaseh, because you've got a transaction here. That's the view of Rameh. Rabbi Yehuda said, you can eat one by one, and you don't have to take Maaseh. Because according to him, a transaction is not kaveah for Maaseh if the malacha is not complete. he says cutting each fruit is not gemar malacha. Cutting the fruit one by one is not gemar malacha. Only in sirev, if you put 2 figs or more in your hand before you ate them, that is gemar malacha.
And you bought them.
Then it's considered gemar malacha, and then the Maaser obligation begins. But eating one by one is not gemar malacha. So then, if you put them together, it's gemar malacha, and then it's a transaction which is obligating for Maaser, and you have to take Maaser. So he wants to say, so Rabbi Yehuda holds Mekach is not kaver for Maaser before the gemar malacha. If you take each one and eat it straight away, that's not gemar malacha. Even when they're in the goren, it's not gemar malacha. When you're taking one by one, you don't take Maaser contributor. When you put them together, then with Rabbanah is goren gemar malacha. Okay, all right. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Maaser beginas v'radim. We have a story. Beginas v'radim shows Yerushalmi. Now there were nice fig trees there. And they were sold for like 3 or 4 figs for an issa. And the people in the garden never separated Maaser Truma, Maaser Ma'olam, because they never separated Truma, because the figs were sold and eaten always one by one, and they never reached a stage of Gemar Malacha. Now, Manan Kayam in here, well, what are we talking about? So it was the Machlokes Reb Chachamim, separating Truma from fruit which is not Gemar Malacha, is Kaver for Maaser. And what's the case? Manan Kayam, because if we're talking about a case of basket of fresh figs, where you separate truma before the gemar malacha, divrei hakol, even according to Chachamim, also you can't eat it without Maaser, because the figs themselves are not requiring any malacha. Everyone agrees they become tevel through the truma. If you're going to tell me that they're arguing in a case of separating truma zeisim ala shemen, olives for oil, right? Olives which are there to make oil, but anovim ala yain, grapes, right, for wine. That also can't be, because in these cases, divrei hakol muter, everyone holds you can eat the fruit. Alright, because most olives and grapes are for wine and oil, therefore the olives and the grapes are like lacking in their main malacha. And even Rebbe Lezer would agree that separating truma would not treat it as if it's gemar malacha to be kaver for Maaser, right, because olives are usually for oil. By you separating now olives, but it's not gemar malacha. And what about right? You got dates, you separate them for truma, and you are wanting to press them down, make some sort of loaf out of it. So dried figs, you separated truma, you still want to thresh them into this barrel, right? You want to stick them into this barrel size. So basically, they're not lacking a major malacha, because many people eat them as they are, without pressing them. But they are lacking something. Therefore, in this situation, Rebbe Lezer says, by you taking truma, you've created a tevel status in the peiros in this fruit. Even though they're not properly complete their work, you still want to press them into the barrel, whatever it is. But separating truma does not create a tevel status on the fruit, because they're not complete. You still got jobs you want to do with them, you want to press them in a certain way, therefore it's not considered a tevel. Okay? So that's what they want to make a chiluk here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So that's what you want to say. So it depends. So you do want to do a job with them, but it's not a job that everyone does. You understand? Now, what about maasros? If you separated Maaser Rishon from your peiros, does that create a tevel status or not? Right? Does that kaver peiros for Maaser? Is there any truma that creates a tevel status, or even Maaser Rishon? And it will forbid them even eating arai until you separate Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani. So Manan Kiyam, what are we talking about? Because in the Krishan is Mareach, if already it's already been piled in the mound and it's Gemar Malacha, you separate Maaser. So of course you have to now separate truma before Maaser, and the Maaser probably they must have separated truma first. So divrei hakol also, everyone agrees you can't eat it without taking Maaser because it's tevel, because of the truma. There's no question if Maaser is kaver, because you must have separated truma. If Maaser Rishon Shek Dimu, you're going to tell me where you separated Maaser first before truma, But Shibolin, right, when it was an earlier stage, where you're allowed to separate Maaseh Rishon when it's still in the stalks before Truma, but then the Divrei HaKol, according to everyone, even Rebbe Lezer, Mutter, you can eat from it, Achilas Arai, because the main part of the Tavua is still lacking, right, still an early stage in development. Even Truma will not be Kaveh at that point. It's just too early. And separate, especially separating Maaseh. But Tmarim will Asilados. And again, it's these dates, and you've got various things you want to do with them, right? You want to press them, and you have intention to press them and to make a loaf or whatever it is. You want to sort of, what do they call them? Threshing them? What do they call them? The figs. You want to thresh them into a barrel. You want to sort of stick them into a barrel. And before the Gmar Malacha, Hifrish men Truma Gedola. You did separate Truma, and then Nimlach, then you changed your mind. He said, you know what, I won't press them into a barrel. I leave it as they are. You hear that? So you had intention to do more work with it, and you separated Truma. Now you change your mind, and you want to leave it as it is. V'hifrish menu mehen Rishon, and you separated Maaseh Rishon. So now the Truma is not Kaveh from Maaseh according to Chachamim, because the dates were considered at the time of Hafosha as if they were not complete. Remember, you had the intention to do more work. And then you separated Truma. You with me? So at the time when you did the Truma, they weren't complete yet. Now it comes out, you decided, I can't be doing any more work, we'll leave it as it is. And now I separate Maaseh. So the Truma was not Kaveh for Chiyuv Maaseh, because the dates were considered time of Hafosha, they weren't complete. So the question is, will the Chachamim say now separating Maaseh, which is done now after I've changed my mind to leave the fruit as it is that Kaveh for Maaseh? Or maybe only Truma can be Kaveh for Maaseh and not Maaseh. Do you understand? So now when you're separating Maaseh, now there's no more work to do, is that Kaveh for Maaseh or not? Now, and of course, as I always tell you, Yerushalmi always likes asking questions about Lemafreya. What would be retroactively? What would be the din? So here's another classic Yerushalmi retroactive question. So, if the case where in Tema Lemafreya Nitvulu, so the question is like this. This question where it was Tevel because of the Truma, then you change your mind. Is the Maaseh now Kaveh? So he says it's like this. In Tema Lemafreya Nitvulu. Now if you're going to tell me, look, when you decided to leave the fruit as it is, then they become Tevel and Mafreya if things happened which are Kaveh for Maaseh beforehand. Because now we see that they were complete all along. Then Truma Shehi Tevelas, separating the Truma which made them into Tevel. And therefore in this situation, we don't have to ask, will Maaseh create a Tevel status? Because the Truma would have done so. But in Tema Mekanu Labah, if you're going to tell me that actually the things which are Kaveh for Maaseh can only be from the time you changed your mind, and only from then they're Gemar Malacha. So then the question is, Rishon Hu Shuhu Tevel, does separating Maaseh, maybe now Maaseh will create, because we can't go retroactive and say the Truma created it, because at that time you were still going to do more work.
And you can't take the Maaseh before you've done the Truma.
And you shouldn't be taking Maaseh without doing Truma, no. But we're saying, which is Kaveh for Maaseh? That's the question. So is Maaseh now Kaveh because the Truma could not do so because you still had the intention to do more work at the time when you did the Truma? Or do we say no? That the Mafreya Nitva, when you changed your mind, then it became Tevel Mafreya because of the Truma before. And that is a classic Yerushalmi question there. Right? Okay. He says we could have answered a straightforward case. We could have said, you kept your original thought, you did press the dates, and then you separated Maaseh Rishon. So the Truma was done before your Gemar Malacha, and therefore we could have a question, is it Kaveh for Maaseh by separating Maaseh Rishon? So we could have had a case where you actually carried out what you wanted to do, but anyway. Alright. The Gemara doesn't answer the question, okay? Next one. Once we've spoken about dates and figs, which are there for pressing, if Truma is Kaveh for Maaseh, we bring a brisa about buying fruit from an Amma Oretz. Alakach Tamorim, Vu Osid Adosan. You buy dates from an Amoritz. He's going to make a loaf out of them. Ugregos, you got your figs from an Amoritz. Vu Osid Adosan, he's going to put them into the barrel. Asalechem ben Arai. You cannot eat from it. Arai. They're kaver for Masechet through the transaction, although they're not Gemar Malacha. He holds a Mekach even without Gemar Malacha. Or Metakanon. And you have to separate, you separate Maasrot but Zamai out of doubt. So basically they were kaver, they were nikva for Masechet in the seller's house, and therefore, and perhaps Masechet was taken, and therefore their din is like all fruit which has been Masechet through Amaretz, which is Zamai, Divrei Rav Meir. So Rav Meir holds it can reach a stage where it requires Masechet even before the Gemar Malacha. Right? That's what Rav Meir is telling you. The Masechet obligation can come about even when they're not fully complete the Malacha that you're doing. Here he wants to press them in these barrels still. But you can still reach an obligation of Masechet status, and therefore you have to take Masechet out of doubt. Chachamim said, no, you can eat it. It's not kaver for Masechet before Gemar Malacha. And therefore, if you buy it and you want to eat it kevar mesakanon, you should take definite maasros, right? Treat it as vadai, treat it as proper tevel, because it's not kaver for masa yet. The seller therefore did not take masa. Divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chila, Rabbi Lezer v'Shem Rabbi Chilfai. So these three Amoraim bring the words of Rameir and the Chachamim as we brought. So this opinion holds because he was still going to do more work on it. He was going to press it. Therefore, there was no ma'aser obligation then. So now you are taking Maaseh, you have to take definite Maaseh. Don't treat it as Demai, you have to take definite Maaseh. Oh, Rabbi Yoda, we found in Chilfai's notebook, according to the Chachamim, one who buys dates and he's going to press them still, he's going to thresh them. So again, you separate, you can eat it temporary and Masakanon. Now what Girsa have we got here? We've got Masakanon Demai. According to this Girsa, you only take Maaseh out of doubt. That's Rav Tzurilia's Girsa. Now, these dinim seem to be contradicting. One minute. First you're saying I can go ahead and eat it. That means nothing's been done. And then you're saying I should only separate Maaseh out of doubt. That means something might have been done. So what's going on? V'kashia. Im echamen arai. You're telling me I can eat it temporary. That means nothing's been done. It's got no Maaseh obligation yet. Then it should be now that you are separating Masakh and Vada. You should definitely separate Maaseh because nothing's been done. If Masakh and Demai, you're going to tell me you're Masakhin it, as Demai because already the guy's taken Maaseh, then then Arai, you shouldn't be able to eat Arai even until you actually take Maaseh. So what's going on? Rabbi Yossi B'Shem Rabbi Hida says the reason why I purchased an Ochel Ben Arai because it's not yet complete. It's not yet got Kavias for Maasros. But why you take it Meiser and Meiser is Demai, Masakran and Demai, you still have to take Meiser, but only Demai, out of doubt. It could be the seller did separate Meiser even before it was complete. Maybe he did. Because this seller is an Amoritz, right? So Mitoich, that she Adea, this Amoritz knows, She'abeisai Tovel, that his bringing it into his home would create a Meiser status. Afu Mafish Truma Mishav Rishona. He will also take Truma very early on, before the Gemar Malacha. He doesn't know that a house is not Tovel before Gemar Malacha. He doesn't realize, he thinks already now he's got a Truma obligation. Do you understand? That's what we're saying. He knows bringing it into your house creates a status of Tovel. So he might take Truma even earlier on, even though they're not developed. He doesn't realize, if they're not developed, there's no obligation yet. He doesn't know that. Therefore, when you now are separating, you only separate out of doubt. Okay? Because it's only Demai, because maybe he did. We carried on the Mishnah. Kalkolas te'elim, that you separate Truma. The Chachamim forbid you to eat Harai. Arav the Kalkolas shall kal Dovid masnisa. Well, the Mishnah said figs, but really the same thing applies to other fruit as well. Now we brought the view of Rav Shimon, that separating Truma does not kaver for Maaseh, even a basket of figs. And we bring a Bryce that explains the review of Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon Matzeh, he allows you to eat temporary fruit, where Truma has been separated, Mikava Chaymer. He says, look, in a case where nothing's been separated, you still have Truma, Maaseh Rishon, Maaseh Sheni. As Amar Mutter, you tell me you can separate and eat it, you can eat it, temporary eating, and you don't have to worry. Where one of them's already been done, The truma has already been done. There's only 2 maasros left. Like Hashikain, how much more so the eating in the temporary stage will be permitted. Now we said, according to Rav Shimon, separating truma is not kaver for maser. Now what about if the owners separated truma and maser rishon? Rishon mashit v'lesheni. By separating maser rishon as well as truma, is that now tevel according to Rav Shimon? Maybe there's a chiv maser sheni now, and you can't eat it arai. The Gemara answers we can base it on the svara which Rav Shimon said, where you've got, once you've separated truma, you've still got maser rishon, you've got maser sheni, and yet, Ad Amar, Rav Shimon says, mutter, you can eat it temporary eating. Now that you separated truma, you separated maser rishon, right? All you have is maser sheni left. Like Kash again, how much more so it will be permitted to eat as a temporary eating. So you see, according to this, Rav Shimon is lenient even in a case where he separated truma and maser rishon as well. Okay, we said in the sefer of our Mishnah, Hilech isazeh. So he said, look, here's some money, and you know what? Give back like 5 figs, right? So what do we say the din was? You shouldn't eat them until you take maser, because the transaction is kaver for maser. That was Rameir's view. Rabbi Yehuda said you can eat them one by one, and you're potter from taking maser. But if you put 2 in your hand, you have to take maser. Rav Zira b'shem Rabbi Yechon, Rav Hida b'shem Rabbi Elazar. Ma'apalig, what are they arguing? But locate, the seller is picking the figs, but a nice thing, and giving them to the buyer. So it's noticeable the seller is the one, he's selling to the kach the figs. But in the case of where the buyer, the locate, the buyer is cutting the figs. He himself is cutting them. He's still paid for them. Locate, lechel, to eat them straight away. Everyone agrees that everyone agrees, even Rameir, that he's allowed to eat one by one, and he's potter from taking maser. Everyone sees him cutting them, eating one, they hold he's got permission for it. It's not noticeable there was a transaction here. It's not noticeable there was a sale. But in Siref, if he puts 2 in his hand, then he must have bought them, and therefore he's chayav to take maser. Rav Hillel Shem Rav Elazar, Geshem Shehem Chalukim Kam, just like they argue, remember Rabbi Yehuda, in our Mishnah about fruit that was sold, Kach Chalukim, they also argue about fruit that's gone in a Chatzah based Shemira, a guarded courtyard. Another obligation of maser comes about when it goes into a guarded courtyard, right? So Rameir, who's machmir here, as far as the transaction, who's kaver even for one fruit, he's also machmir with the courtyard. He holds his kaver even one fruit. And Rabbi Yehuda, who's lenient with the transaction, he's not chayv maser unless you have 2. He's also lenient with the courtyard. So let's see. Let's bring a deal. This din of a courtyard is kaver for maser, and we're going to see like Rav Hillel, Rameir's machmir with the courtyard. So Rav Yechon said the chiyuv of separating maser is through a transaction, mekach, v'chatzah, or if it's gone in a courtyard, the Shabbos, or even going that Shabbos is kaver for maser. Now all these dinim ain't on Torah. They're not Torah dinim, they're only rabbinical dinim. You hear that? Transaction obligating, courtyard, Shabbos, they're only rabbinical chumras. Rabbi Imi b'shem Rish Lakish, he said the way to kaver for person maser machuva v'kulam. That means the one which is so clear even from the Torah din, that is zu chatzeh beis hashmira. A guarded courtyard brings about a Torah obligation for maser. So you got an argument, Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish, is the chiyuv of a courtyard, is it more severe than the other obligations? Is it chayav even the Torah? Or is it only a rabbinical like all the others? Now everyone agrees there's no chiyuv of a courtyard, it's not less than the other chiyuvim, but it could be more, that's what we're saying. So it must be the chumrah Rameir, which was said with the mekach, would apply with the chotzer as well. Yeah, it could be a chotzer is much more severe, it could be mekach and chotzer as well. Now, chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechon. Kach me'eshem Rabbi Yehuda's Rameir. This is what Rabbi Yehuda said to Rameir. Ein at moedeli. Do you not agree? You're buying fruit from the field. Nice in libla, you can give it to your son to eat one by one. Shu potter, he doesn't have to take maser. If that's the case, mali, what difference is on the pevelis and libnai? You're cutting fruit and giving it to your son. Mali like it when I said lacha, or you cut it and give it to someone else, to someone buying it. Now the one says, Rameir was machmir in a case where the seller cut the figs and gave them to the buyer. So now, let's explain. Where do Rameir know this? Rabbi Yehuda, why do you want to say Rameir is mechayev in a case where the seller is the one cutting, but and giving it to the buyer? I name and maybe Rameir was machmer even in where the buyer is doing the cutting, and he's eating. How do you know you're only being strict where the seller cuts? Maybe even where the buyer cuts. Sorry, how do you know where the seller cuts? Yeah, that's right. Maybe even where the buyer cuts. Ramona, less can like it. You know what? Take out the words that the buyer is cutting the figs and eating it. You can't say that's what the Mishnah is talking about. Ella, you have to say it's a case where the seller is located. When I said the seller is the one cutting and giving them to the buyer. Now, why do you say this? Min hada. We can learn it from the following. Now, at the end of the Mishnah, we learned. Rabbi Yehuda brings a raya against Rameir from the Ginas V'Rodin. Remember this garden, which was in Yerushalmi? I remember they never took Masechet from it. It was always one by one. They never took Masechet. Islach Rameir, you want to tell me now, Ginas V'Rodin. What was the case? Who was cutting everything in Ginas V'Rodin? Right? Do you think the buyer was the one cutting the figs? But eating them? Definitely not. Because it was a special garden. No one else would have been allowed into this garden, right? It would have been a very special garden with guards and everything. The buyer never got in there. It must be the seller cutting the figs for nice and giving it to the buyer. He would not allow a buyer to go into the garden to cut for himself. So here as well in the words of Rameir, it's talking about a case where the seller takes the figs for nice and gave it to the buyer. And therefore when Rabbi Yehuda wanted to bring a raya against him, he brought a raya from the case where the seller was the one doing the cutting. Now Ramona learns why it's poshut in this garden they wouldn't allow the buyer to go in there. Du amale, if the buyer would have wanted to go in, the owner would say, "In at alelat mekal, you're ruining all the roses. If you go in this garden, we're not going to allow you to go in." Now, what do you see? That he understood that this garden in Yerushalmi, there were all sorts of roses there. Masnisa pliga hadod Ramana. Actually, the Mishnah goes against Ramana. The following Brisa argues in the understanding. So he understood this garden. They had sorts of roses there. Okay, it's not so clear cut. Let's see. The following Brisa argues on the understanding of Ramana. In the case of a seller, one who's selling land, he tells the buyer, "Karma ani moichalach. I'm selling you a vineyard. Alpha pishem bo gefanim, even though there's no vines." Now, in other words, you can have a vineyard even though there's no vines. People call it a vineyard. Harezem mochel, it is sold. You can't go back on the transaction and say, "Oh, that's not a vineyard." Because Shalom Mochel Elishma, he gave him the name of the vineyard. That was what he sold in. The land is given that name. People give it that name even though there's no vines there. So he didn't cheat him. And if a person says, "You know what? I'm selling you an orchard. There's no trees there. Harezem mochel is sold. He sold him the name of the orchard. So people give this land orchard, so it's a transaction which is valid. So you learn it could be, land can be a vineyard, orchard, even if there's no vines, no trees. So it could be this Ginas V'Rodin, this roses garden, mentioned our Mishnah, could be there were no roses there at all, right? So you can't tell me, only the seller would do the cutting. He wouldn't allow the buyer in there. What makes you say that? Maybe there's no reason to stop the buyer going in. Maybe the buyer was the one who did all the cutting, yeah? Who says there were actual roses in there? Okay. How are you doing? Shall we carry on? Bit more? Yeah. A person, Ivy, you okay? A bit more? Yeah? A person tells his friend, "You know what? Here's an Issa for 20 figs, which I'm going to choose from your... I'm going to choose from your orchard. Right? I'm going to take my 20 figs. Here's the coin. So basically, I will choose. The buyer is saying, I will choose these figs. He can take them and eat them one by one without taking masa. It's not kaver for masa. Why? You're not putting two fruit together. And if he says, "Here's, take this coin, be'eshkol shavali, with this cluster of grapes I'm going to pick. You can pluck the grapes one by one without taking masa." And if he said, "Be'riban shavali, here's a coin for the pomegranate I will take. You can take the various pomegranate seeds one by one. taking Maaseh. And he said, here's the Cohen, the melon, the watermelon I will take. Sofos v'oichel, you can cut pieces of it and eat it one by one without taking Maaseh. Yeah? Now, if the buyer says, here's the Cohen be'eshrim te'enim elu, these 20 figs, b'shnei eshkoles elu, these cluster of grapes, b'shnei remainim elu, these pomegranates, b'shnei avotich elu, these watermelons, oichel gedarkai, the buyer can eat it normally, even putting it together, upoto, he doesn't have to take Maaseh, he acquired it connected to the ground. Right? They're still growing these things. He's acquired it while connected to the ground. And Mecca, before the case was that I will pick. I'm buying what I will pick. Here he's saying, here's the money for these. They are still growing on the ground. And a transaction which is done with fruit connected to the ground is not kaver lamaseh. Right? It's not kaver lamaseh, then it's still growing in the ground. Now, a worker who's doing malacha, Peres balabais, he's allowed to eat, right? From the malacha, when he's doing work on the fruit, he's allowed to eat from the various fruits. It's not considered his wage. It's not considered a transaction, which creates a tenor status. And a worker is allowed to eat the Peres derech arai without taking Maaseh. Now, there are situations where he cannot eat from the Torah, but he makes a stipulation with the balabais that he should be allowed to eat from the fruit as a chelek of his work. And then it's considered like a transaction. Do you understand? So in some cases he can eat because the Torah allowed him to eat. That's not a transaction. There are cases where he eats based on a stipulation, which is a transaction. And therefore that's there may well be a master obligation in that case. So now let's see. So you hire a worker to start drying out the figs. He's going to dry out the figs in the sun to dry them. And the worker says, I'm going to work for you. I want to eat from the te'enim during my work. I want to eat from these figs. He's allowed to eat a potter. He's potter from Maaseh. Even if he made no condition, he's allowed to eat from the fruit because of the schus that the Torah gave him. The Torah allowed him to eat it. Even though he added a condition, that's not a transaction, and he's not Chaim Maaseh, right? The Torah gave him the right to eat from the fruit while he's dealing with these figs. Now, there are cases where he makes a condition and he has not got a Torah obligation. If he made a condition with the owner of the figs, I want to eat and my son to eat, he made a condition that my son should eat for my wage instead of me, my son will eat. Now, Rabbi say that's not a Torah din. The Torah never gave rights for the son to eat. In such a case, he can eat. Well, potter, it's potter from Maaseh, because even if he didn't make a condition, he would be able to eat from the Torah. Ubanai, for his son to eat, yes, he can eat, but b'chayav, he has to separate Maaseh. The son has no zuchus to eat from the Torah only because of the Tanai, the condition that his father made, and therefore it's considered a transaction as far as the son is concerned. You follow? So when he makes it, well, he can eat anyway, so he doesn't have to take Maaseh. For the son to eat, that's already his own little transaction, and for that, the Maaseh obligation comes about. Now, if the worker says, I'm going to work for you, but I want to eat at the time when I'm putting out all these figs in the sun, and also afterwards. He wants to eat from the figs, not just when he's working actually with the malach or the balabais, but even later on. Now that later on is again a dispensation, a transaction, right? The Torah only lets him eat at the beginning while he's doing the work, not later on. So b'shasa kasiyah, the time of the drying of figs, he can eat a potter, his potter from Maaseh. Because even if he made no condition, he can eat from the Torah. But later on, yes, he can eat, but he has to take Maaseh first, because in that case, that again is not eating from the Torah allowed him to eat because of his own monetary agreement. This is the rule, Torah, potter. If you're eating because the Torah let you eat, you're potter from Maaseh. If you're not eating because the Torah let you eat, only because of some Tanai avodah that you agreed, then chayev, then you are liable for Maaseh. Now, if the worker's doing work with the sort of, these are bad quality figs, You can't eat from the other types of nice, good figs. If you're doing work with nice sheba, you're doing work with these figs, don't eat with these other ones, because the source of the work from the Torah is limited to the type that you're working in. But you're allowed to stop yourself from eating the bad figs when you're working there, so you're more hungry when you reach to do the expensive figs. And then you'll eat. So you're allowed to starve yourself doing the rubbish work, so that you're more hungry when you're doing the better work. Right? If you're swapping figs with your friend, whether it's both of them are thinking, I'm going to eat the figs that I get from you, you're going to eat the figs you get from me, or we're working, I'm going to dry out your figs, you're going to dry out my figs. One is intending to eat the figs, the other one is intending to dry out the figs. In all these cases, Chaim, each one has to separate Masechet before he eats from the figs he received, because swapping them is like a type of transaction which obligates Masechet. Rabbi Yehuda said, if you swap in order to eat the figs you're receiving, Chaim, you have to take Masechet, because that's Gemara Malacha. But if you're swapping ligzos in order to dry out the figs that you're receiving, you are potter, because you do not have a Gemara Malacha until they're dried out. The transaction cannot be kaveah before the Gemara Malacha. Okay, to be continued on both sides.